For over 8 billion years, the earth has been here, holding and feeding single-celled organisms, dinosaurs, plants, flowers, and just a small fraction of that time, humans. We acknowledge and embrace the many generations of Vietnamese who carried Buddhism to us through our teacher, Thai, and helped build the Sangha in new lands. Their history and practice are present with us today. We're also grateful to know our teacher is a continuation, like the rain is a continuation of the cloud. Thai, too, is here present with us today. We see and hold to the Native and First Nation peoples who have lived on the lands before us, who cared for it as we do, and lived their lives in community for tens of thousands of years. Here in San Diego County, this is the Kumeyaay Nation. They're present here too with us today. And today we also honor our diversity, whether that be gender, religion, ethnicity, national origin, age, physical or mental abilities, sexual orientation, gender identity, or political affiliation. The Sangha can hold all these. All this is present here today as the Sangha is invited to come back to our breathing, so that our collective energy of mindfulness will bring us together as an organism, going as a river with no separation. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. In breath, out breath. Aware of body, smiling to body. Aware of body, smiling. Aware of the fresh morning air, I breathe in, feeling grounded on the earth. I breathe out. Fresh morning air, feeling grounded. Breathing in, we connect with the animals roaming the land. Breathing out, we recognize our shared land. Coyote, deer, and mountain lion sharing land. Sitting here together as a Sangha, I breathe in, aware of the ancestral peoples who have lived on this land for millennia. I breathe out. Sangha together, ancestral peoples. A new Sangha grows, connected to the past. A new Sangha grows, protecting the future. New Sangha grows, protecting the future. Sangha well-being nourishes my well-being. My well-being nourishes Sangha well-being. Sangha well-being, my well-being. watering seeds of joy and understanding, watering seeds of inclusiveness. Joy and understanding, inclusiveness. Good morning, dear friends, dear Sangha. Good to see you all here. Today is December 15th, 2022, and we're in the Moon Over Mountain Peak Meditation Hall. It's a very special little meditation hall. It's been here long before the big hall, and we used to have our Dharma talks in here with Thai, and our ceremonies and so on and so forth. So it's always a treat for me to be in this hall. I wonder if somebody could open that window just a little bit, please. I'm a little warm, so could be just nervousness, I don't know. So our topic today is, thank you, is wayfinding. How do we find our way? And it's going to be a pretty simple talk. We could always have a really complex and deep dive into Buddhist psychology or something like that at the end of our 90-day retreat. But we could also just come back to our basic understanding of the practice and be reminded. And so I think that's a really important topic, because the more that we are able to be reminded of our basic practices of present moment, wonderful moment, our breath, the easier it is to sustain that over time, and be able to sustain that in our own communities, in our own homes, wherever we might live and reside. So finding our way, to know our path, is sometimes a little bit jumbled. Sometimes the forest is really thick and you're not sure where you're going. Sometimes you get into one of those little, like, the trees are all around you and it's dark and it's rainy and windy, and you don't think there's any way possible to move forward from that place. And yet there is, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer, sometimes it can take a long time, sometimes it can be quick. And one of the things that's really helpful is to have good spiritual friends on the path, so people in the Sangha who can support you and guide you. And that this isn't necessarily something unique. We also carry with us millennia of ancestors before us who lived and breathed on this earth and took care of this earth and raised families, discovered mindfulness, spirituality, religion, to help support them in their being in the world. And it's really nice to have this come after the talk last night, which was wonderful. You know, just the wisdom of the earth. This earth has been here for, billions of years. Billions. Billions. I mean, can you even fathom billions? And the sun is out there in our solar system giving us life, essentially. The sun gives us life. And so I've always, I just, when you sit and kind of ponder those things, it's really kind of unfathomable. It's really hard to sort of grasp. So what we do is we just enjoy it for what it is, and be practicing gratitude for the plants and for the animals and the minerals and the rocks and the other people all around us. And so that's our basic practice. When we say mindfulness, what do we mean by mindfulness? Mindfulness is mindfulness of something. So anything can be a object of our attention. It can be a flower. It can be a scent coming from the incense. It can be a thought. It can be an emotion. Any of those things can serve as an object of mindfulness. And mindfulness practice is practicing mindfulness of something. So we start with the practice of mindfulness of our breath, our breathing. And I think we do that because it's really concrete. It's something that we all do. And if you weren't breathing, what would you be? Don't be afraid to say it. Dead. You'd be dead. So we all have this in common, this breathing thing. And we take it wherever we go. It's always with us, regardless of whether we're driving the car, sitting in a meditation hall, going to the bathroom, having an argument, yelling at the driver on the freeway. The breath is always there. It's always present. And so do we have the capacity to bring attention to that, to make our breath the object of our mindfulness? And in doing so, we connect our body and our mind. And that can generate a level of ease and comfort to us, regardless of the situation. There's some physiology stuff that happens too, but I'm not a scientist or a doctor, so I can't really speak to that. But there is something about all the oxygen going into the blood or something like that. I don't know. So the mindfulness in its very basic sense is this concept of mindfulness is something. But we can also practice stillness. We can practice just being and kind of allow the world to take place around us. It could be sitting here at the koi pond, just kind of sitting, nothing to do, nowhere to go, and just enjoying presence of being here. And in doing so, you might become aware of your mind, because your mind may wander, it may start to think about things, or it may start to think, gosh, that's a really big koi fish, you know? But if you're aware of it, how cool, you know? So this is our practice. Wow, that's a really big koi fish. And then if you're like me, you think about, gosh, there's no coverage in the pond anymore, and what's going to happen when the osprey comes? They have no place to hide. Because I've seen an osprey come and have his lunch here in the koi pond before. So this is where my mind goes. But I can do that with, you know, some level of attention, right? So it's just having some attention. And doing nothing is also, you know, also a form of attention. It's attention to nothing, just being. Excuse me. So I'm reminded of, so finding our way can begin with mindfulness. And I'm reminded of the Inuit people of Baffin Island. They're up in the, that's Arctic in the north, right? Arctic? Okay. And they have routes across the ice that are still there and change based on society, based on water levels and that sort of stuff. And they retain that in the individual memories of people who live there. The Inuit people, the hunters, for example, they know how to traverse across vast distances, like hundreds of kilometers across vast distances, and not get lost. And it all looks the same. I mean, it's just a white desert, and yet they're able to navigate that. And what I read is that they, one of their key elements that they use is wind. They use wind to navigate. Not necessarily like the actual feeling of the wind, which they do also, but like they look at like snowdrifts, because they know which way the winds blow at certain times of the year. And so that tells them, you know, direction. And they also have a sense of where the seashore is, where the edge of the land is. And so they use those two things in combination to navigate. They might, you know, set a trap in the snow. One story I read is they set a trap, and the hunter went back 20 years later and found the trap. And there were 5 foxes in it. So this is, and they found it. I mean, it's just incredible. It's kind of like they have a relationship with the environment. They're connected to the environment. They have a mindfulness attention to the environment around them, and they are able to use that to navigate and travel vast distances. And if you speak to one of these hunters, they say things like, I just feel my way. But it's incredibly accurate how they do that. They say the most dangerous weather for a hunter is fog, because they don't have that capacity to use the stars or the wind, because it's just kind of sitting, it's still, so. So we have this mindfulness, and we have this ability to pay attention to something. So how do we incorporate this into a practice? And here at the monastery, we have wonderful support around us. We have a schedule, we have other practitioners, we have classes, we have Dharma talks, we have sitting meditation, and so forth and so on. But sometimes it's difficult to translate into our home life. because we may have stressful work, we may have children at home, grandchildren, partner, no partner, we're alone all the time. So there's all these other external factors that we don't necessarily experience here. What we do bring here and that's there is ourselves, of course, and we still have emotions and our thoughts and our ideas and our perceptions. All those things exist here and there. And hopefully while we're here, we have a little bit more support to explore those things, those emotions that come up in us. So the best practice that I found, so when I started sitting, meditation, and practicing in the late 90s, I was not sitting with a Sangha. I was a solo practitioner. And, but I had a CD of the chants, and I had the chanting book, and I used those every day. So I would just put on the CD, and it was a CD, put on a CD and listen to the morning chant, and have the book there, right? And after a while of listening to it, I learned it, and I started singing it to myself before sitting. The other thing in the chanting book is there's all these little gathas, or small verses, and they're a great method to help bring our attention back to the present, whatever it is that we're doing. The other book is Present Moment, Wonderful Moment, that has those verses in it. So the best one to learn, because it's the hardest one, but it's so cool when you finally do it, and you're able to do it without thinking, is the waking up in the morning gatha. You know, so imagine being able to just open your eye, alarm goes off, you turn it off, and before you open your eyes maybe, you say the gatha. Waking up this morning, I smile. 24 brand new hours before me. I vow to live fully in each moment and look at all beings with the eyes of compassion and love. There's some variations on that. That's the one I like. So most mornings today, most, not all, of course, that arrives in my mind when I wake up. But the training to do that took a long time. You know, having it there by the bedside, reading it instead of memorizing it, and finally, it probably took a decade maybe or longer before it was like ever present when I wake up in the morning. But what a thrill, really, to like begin your day with a vow. It's the first vow of the day. I vow to look at all beings with the eyes of compassion and love. It's a big order, you know, it's a lot. But it's my first vow of the day. And if I can accomplish some of it, then it's wonderful. The second practice that we can incorporate into our lives is learning to stop. So here we have the bells, and they help us to stop. And it's related to our in-breath and out-breath. So discovering a method or a means to stop in your life is going to be individual. So it's going to be up to you, depending on your conditions, what environment you're in. But there may be some kind of bell present, not a sound of the bell, but a bell of mindfulness, could be anything, present in your environment that is regular and ongoing, that you could say to yourself, you know, every time I hear that, or every time I see that, I'm going to stop and practice stopping. So if we can learn how to stop, it makes it a lot easier to stop when we should stop. Just like when we're about to say something we shouldn't say, or we're about to do something we shouldn't do, but we're training ourselves to stop. So if we can learn that way. I remember one year, my son and daughter, they both grew up here at Deer Park, and one time when they were probably around, I don't know, 6 or 7. My son, Jasper. We were at Starbucks, and across the street from Starbucks was a church. And we were just sitting outside on the patio, all talking and making noise and everything. And all of a sudden the church bells go off, like for the time or whatever it was. And it took us a minute to realize that Jasper had stopped. And he was listening to the bell. I was like, whoa. So he had managed to incorporate that into his being, you know, and that too was amazing to experience, which then, of course, became a bell of mindfulness for me and my wife, Leslie. So to be able to experience that was a real treat. So our true home is in every step and every breath. So walking meditation, of course, is another major practice that we can incorporate into our lives. Which reminds me of another story of the Australian Aboriginals who walked a lot in the desert of Australia. And they had something called dreaming tracks, the Nourishing highway system. Fancy word for something, I don't know. Anyway, the Aboriginal Australian star maps are part of songlines, a fascinating, complex method of navigation. In their mythology, a songline is a myth based around localized creator beings during the dreaming, the indigenous Australian embodiment of the creation of the earth. Each songline explains the route followed by the creator being during the course of the myth. The path of each creator myth is marked in sung lyrics. And the dreaming is this interrelationship, interbeing, this interrelationship between people and the environment and all things around an environment. So similar to the Inuit people, the Aborigines of Australia, they primarily use stars to navigate, and the environment is just as harsh as the Arctic, but in a different way, of course. It's dry, and so they have to know where to find water. So as they travel, again, hundreds of kilometers through the desert in the summer, they have to know where to stop for water. And these are passed down through generations and generations. And it's not that they necessarily use the stars as a map, but they kind of, it's a guide in a direction. And they can navigate through this whole environment. Humans have amazing capacity. So if you think about the Aborigines and the Inuit, consider what possibilities exist within you from your ancestors, from your Sangha, to allow you to find your way through the practice of mindfulness. Maybe we can listen to the sound of the bell. So that's what is mindfulness? How do we start with the practice? And then how do we maintain the practice? And of course, maintaining the practice is about Sangha. It's also about the 5 mindfulness trainings. Because we have all this suffering in the world, racism, violence, hatred. climate. And they can cause us to suffer a lot too, all of those. Thai says, man is not the enemy. Our enemy is our anger, hatred, greed, fanaticism, and discrimination. Man is not the enemy. So it's, I think it's easy to point fingers and say, my way is the best way, you're wrong, you're crazy, they're crazy, they're psychos. They're full of hate. And yet what are we doing when we do that? We're harming ourselves too. We're not allowing ourselves to be invited into a deeper understanding, a deeper awareness, a deeper attention to others and their experiences. So much of who we are is a product of where we came from. Our ancestors, the town we lived in, the community we lived in, the wealth we had or didn't have. All of those things form who we are as people. And sometimes we can break out of those. I think each of us probably hope in some way that we've broken out of the ancestral mold, right? So many people arrive here with like this blocking of their ancestors, you know. I don't like my parents because they made me all screwed up. Oh, I grew up in a very strict religious environment and it just messed me up completely and I hate that church, right? So with our practice and a lot of deep looking and a lot of compassion and a lot of love, we can unpack those things with mindfulness practice, with the help of a Sangha, with the help of good spiritual friends. For the longest time, you know, I really was angry at the church I grew up in. And I stopped going to it as soon as I got a driver's license, so when I was 16, I told my parents, I'll meet you at church, and I wouldn't go. And I actually started going to another church other than the one I grew up in. And I didn't see any value in it. And I didn't see why they made me go. And I think my first insight into my relationship with that, my religious upbringing, was when I received the 14 mindfulness trainings, when I got my OI jacket. Because my grandmother wrote to me and she said, "You're not becoming a Buddhist, are you?" And what do you say to that? To your grandmother? I mean, she's grandma, you know, you don't want to hurt her, you know? So it caused me to really look closely at my relationship to my upbringing, which is a very long ancestral history. Like we're like a Sangha. The religious community I grew up in was like we lived in community, and you know, you only married people in the community, sort of thing. And I was able to write back to her with my most sincerity and honesty and truth and say, "Grandma, I'm the very best Christian I've ever been in my life." And it was true. And one of the things that attracted me to Thai and his teachings was what I learned is that what he teaches is what I learned in that church. And I didn't realize it, you know. And so today I can look back and today I can feel like I have nothing but respect and appreciation for the church in which I grew up in. It made me who I am. How can I deny Kenley, who he is? I can't just say, oh, that's way back then and didn't have any impact. It's kind of like what I told therapists for my whole adult life until I got into my 50s, which is, I don't ever talk about anything before the age of 18. And I maintained that all the way into my 50s. I would never talk, it was like this black hole back there I didn't want to talk about. And I finally did, and I'm like, whoa. So that's what's there, you know. So this is the difficult work in navigating our future, you know, navigating our present. It opens up the floodgates in a way that we can approach our relationships with ourselves and with others in a completely different way. And I can wholeheartedly not agree with certain individuals, like Rush Limbaugh. I mean, why would I agree with him? But I don't have to hate him. I can completely disagree with him. And I may never have, well, he's dead now, but I may never have an opportunity to talk to him about it. But there's probably other individuals like that, right? And if I think about it really closely, he was the most listened to radio talk show, I think, in the history of all talk show. Like, that many people listened to him, right? So then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is the guy that lives across the street. This is the guy that lives down the road. This is my boss. And all of a sudden I have to kind of look at it in a different way. Because if I hate Rush Limbaugh, then do I hate my neighbor? It's what we have to ask ourselves in our relationships with others. And we don't have to agree, but we don't have to hate. So I wrote this little paragraph here, and I'm trying to decide if I should read it because it's got all kinds of fancy words in it. It's from this book called Wayfinding. I'll just go ahead and read it, and then you guys can decide whether it's appropriate or not. Okay, so at the heart of successful navigation is the capacity to record the past, attend to the present, and imagine the future. I do like that sentence. A goal or place that we would like to reach. In this way, navigation involves not only literal travel through space, but also mental travel through time. What some call autoenetic consciousness. I had to write it out like with how you say it. And that's why it sounded so funny. Noetic comes from the ancient Greek word inoio, which means I perceive or I understand. And the term autonoetic is now used to describe our ability to mentally represent ourselves as autonomous agents in time, giving us the capacity for self-reflectivity and self-knowing. So knowing ourselves, we're able to record the past, look at our ancestors, where we came from, attend to the present, see what we're doing right here, right now, and imagine a future that's more beautiful. So what is our path? So I would be remiss to not talk a little bit about the 5 mindfulness trainings. How many of you received the 5 mindfulness trainings already? Okay, about half. Okay. So far we've been talking about what is mindfulness, how might we practice with mindfulness, how might we maintain our mindfulness as we navigate forward on our path. And the 5 mindfulness trainings, historically known as the precepts, 5 precepts, they used to be just, a couple words, and now they're paragraphs, because Thai wanted us to look deeply into what it meant to not kill. And so we have a little bit more language around it to help us to practice. And anyone can practice the 5 mindfulness trainings. Anyone can receive the 5 mindfulness trainings. And in doing so, you may incorporate these trainings as a guide for living, a direction to go, and help us practice with awareness and understanding and love. And it invites us to look at different elements of our lives. They're not commandments like the Christian commandments. They're guides. They're a direction. They're an aspiration to move. Even after 20 years of practicing these, I am definitely not 100% practitioner of these trainings. I have an intention to be, but I'm not. So it's just important to bring that aspect out. So the first one's about life, reverence for life. And what it says is, I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking and in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views. So that last part, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views. That's what I was talking about with Rush Limbaugh. So when we think about not killing, we can think about ourselves first. So maybe that means to us that I won't go hunting, or I won't serve in the military and go fight in a war. It could also mean I won't drive a car, because the number 1 killer of wild animals in America is vehicles. Or you could talk about, I won't drive a car because of the fossil fuels and the steel and the tires and the leather, and because something had to die for that to happen. Then it says not to let others kill. Oh, what does that mean? Not let others kill. Yeah, that's tough. But there's ways to do that too. My stepbrother for many years claimed, I think he claimed like 15 dependents or 20 dependents on his tax return. And because he didn't want to devote any money to the military. So he didn't pay any taxes because he had so many dependents, which he did have dependents. He would send money to Colombia, to a village where he had been, and help support them with their living. They didn't catch him for quite a few years. It did catch up to him. So that might be a way to not let others kill. That's just one example. and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking or in my way of life. This is a very, what do you call, radical proposition. And this is why we can't do this 100%, you know, because there's just too much. You can become overwhelmed with do-goodism. You know, there has to be some level, because later it talks about fanaticism and dogmatism, right? So we have to be careful not to become fanatic or dogmatic about this. When I was first a vegan, I was dogmatic and fanatic about it, and I made sure people knew why they should be a vegan. And what I found out is I alienated a lot of people, including my family. So after many years, I softened up, and I no longer make an issue of it. I don't talk about it. They always bring it up, but I don't ever. I don't ever bring it up. And you know, when I go to Grandma's house and she's made me a nice vegan meal, and it's full of cheese, I eat it. Why offend her? You know, I'm not going to die by eating a meal with cheese in it. So that's reverence for life. Okay, second one is true happiness. Okay, true happiness says, I am committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting. Happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering. That true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion. There's that word compassion again. It was in the first one too. I didn't read that part, but it's in the first one too. This one also talks about right livelihood. So that's an element that Ty threw in the last update of the 5 mindfulness trainings. Right livelihood, contributing to suffering. You know, that we try to work in a way that we're not. We try not to work in areas where we're contributing to suffering of others in the world. So this practice of generosity, I think the acting part sometimes is the easiest. I'm generous, I go to the soup kitchen at Christmas time, you know, or I give $30 a month to the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation. There's lots of ways to practice generosity in action. But are we able to practice generosity in our thinking and in how we speak? So that the practice of cultivating that generosity of thinking comes through the practice of mindfulness. Being able to, because when we're able to slow down, we're able to listen. Ty always connects listening and compassion together, and I tie it with generosity too. Because I think that if we're able to do that practice of awareness of body, awareness of breath, we're able to take a look at our relationships with others and things around us, that when we do that, we inevitably will be nourishing that seed of generosity in ourselves and transforming our thinking around it. You know. We have to be careful in today's world around generosity, because sometimes we practice generosity to be seen, to be recognized, because it's the right thing to do. And it's not to say that practicing generosity in those ways is bad. It's not bad for the people you're helping, the things that you're helping, the animals that you're helping, the planet. But it might not be so bad, it might not be so good for you as an individual. So this too is part of our practice, to be able to understand our own mind and take a look at our emotional landscape to see, hey, I did this all this time because I wanted recognition. Maybe we do this in work. So recognizing that may allow us to either continue doing it but with a different perspective, a new perspective, or to say, hey, maybe this isn't the right thing for me to be doing, and then try something different. How many of you have been in some form of intimate relationship? Yeah, most of you. Would you say that your happiness and suffering is not separate from their happiness and suffering? Yeah. So we can take that little microcosm of a relationship of two people and see that when I'm suffering, the other person is also suffering. And when I'm happy, the other person can also be happy. Or sometimes I'm suffering and the other person's happy so they can support my suffering. Seeing that interrelationship with each other, and beyond just an intimate relationship, but in all of our relationships. That by us, even here, by you walking beautifully on Deer Park land in Solidity, Hamlet, I can look at you and see, wow, there's a beautiful person walking beautifully. And that makes me happy. And I don't know what you're thinking when you're doing that. It doesn't really matter. Because I'm assuming that you're happy walking, because you're doing it with some mindfulness. And that can bring me joy too. So. All right, true love is the third training. I'm committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, and families, and society. True love, let's see, it says it here somewhere. The four basic elements of true love are loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness. The four elements of true love are loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness. We can all do this. This is possible. We can all practice loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness. We can do it. It's not impossible. It's not one of those like in number 1 where it says, not let others kill. It's a little bit more, we have a little more capacity to do this one. It takes a lot of work. It's not easy, but it's possible. And I received the name Joy 17 years ago, true recollection of joy. And I must say I was quite unhappy with receiving that name. When Ty said it, I'm like, joy? Really? I was disappointed because I didn't know anything about joy. And I don't know if I want to practice joy because I'm not that kind of person, So I've spent many years trying to understand what joy means and to cultivate it, and I have touched it and I have experienced it. And while it says my joy is your joy, that's true, but my joy is totally different from your joy. That's all I got to say. It's a different kind of joy, okay? I'm just going to still differentiate who I am. But practicing this in our relationships, I think is really important, of course, because Thai shared it with us in this training. And you can take each one of these one at a time and try and, like I did with joy, I spent many years with it, trying to, understand it, look deeply at it, incorporate it. We can do the same with loving kindness, with compassion, and with inclusiveness. Practicing true love, we know that we will continue beautifully into the future. Okay, the fourth one is loving speech and deep listening, and there's that word again, committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening. So compassion shows its head here again. So I have a calligraphy in my room that's right where I sit and talk with people, and it says, listen with compassion. It's Thai's calligraphy. And this one relates to the right diligence, which is the part of the Noble Eightfold Path, right diligence. And being committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening. Cultivating means to be able to grow, right? To be able to nourish it, to be able to give it what it needs to be healthy. The water and the nutriments. So we cultivate that in ourselves. And we do that with practice. And it's best to, you start with those close to you, those that you love, to be able to practice loving speech with those that you love. Because if we can't practice loving speech with those that we love, it'll be really weird to practice it with a stranger or, a colleague at work. So start with those who are close to us, and also with ourselves, because a lot of us have a lot of negative language about ourselves. We're constantly judging, reacting, perceiving things in ourselves, about ourselves, that may not be loving speech, so practice that loving speech for yourself. And compassionate listening comes back to what I said earlier about stopping, learning to stop, learning to breathe, and to be able to listen. And listen with the mind of presence, the mind of openness, the mind of stillness. A mind that doesn't have to react to what you're hearing. A mind that doesn't have to respond to what you're hearing. Because if we're thinking about that, we're not able to be present with what's going on right here, right now. I love this one. And one that just is so important to continue to nurture. And because I make so many mistakes, I say things so reflexively that I sometimes don't pay attention. So this is a good guide for the future. The last one is as nourishment and healing. It's about consumption. I'm committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. And when we talk about consuming, we're not just talking about food, we're talking about sense impressions, things that come in through our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, mind. It's also talking about volition, what is our greatest desire, what do we desire, and our consciousness. Of course, there's specific things, you know, like there's actually a laundry list of things here. And when Tai Fap Lu read it the other day at the transmission, they added music, which I was annoyed by. I was like, really? Because I love music. So now I'm going to have to pay more attention to my music, I guess. So one last little story. Of navigation, of finding our way. Actually kind of two. So in the South Pacific, the Hawaiian and Polynesians, similar to the Aborigines and the Inuit, they're able to navigate vast distances across the ocean and find their way between islands when they can't even see the other islands. They just go. And they've produced some of the world's richest, most complex and beautiful traditions of navigation, which many of it was lost after first contact with the Europeans. So this is damage done by the Europeans. But today there's a resurgence in the canoe travel across the ocean in the Polynesian islands and relearning this traditional way of navigation without the GPS. For example, the Pulawatans see their islands as communities connected by lines of travel through the ocean. They maintain vast mental maps of all the islands' spatial relationships to one another. But because these places are all out of sight of each other, the landmarks they use are swells, animals, reefs, wind and sun and stars. So this is how they move across the ocean like that. So again, from the book Wayfinding, I read monarch migrations cover so much distance that they eclipse a single lifespan. They're so big, the migration, it's more than one lifespan. Butterflies that depart on the expedition die along the way, and it's their great-grandchildren who complete the journey. Wow. Biologists call this a one-way migration. 50 different species of dragonflies fly along routes that are so distant, the insects die before the end of the journey and their descendants complete it. So monarchs, dragonflies. So like the monarch, we may need multiple generations to complete this journey. We are a continuation on a journey of discovery and enlightenment. And how we live our lives today can help our ancestors, our descendants in the future. We can pass on those good seeds of practice, mindfulness, loving speech, compassion, even joy.